time to CYBERSHOCK. Alright, welcome to the show, everyone. This is CYBERSHOCK. I am your host, I guess. Hamish. Peregrine Kiwi on Twitter and here on Twitch. I wrote this brawl, and above me is...
Me?
Yeah, you're above me. This was the order we discussed.
I'm below you in my
Oh!
stream, though. I know.
Well, you're above me on the stream.
Oh no, that's okay. Hi, I'm Kira. And I'm working on my magnum opus, which is a cyberpunk role-playing game called Sync, about feelings and relationships and activism. And yeah, I think that's all we say. So who's next?
It's Fraser, and he's to your right, I think. Yeah. I mean, left on the screen.
Yeah, I am Fraser Simons. I wrote The Veil and the supplement Cascade. I have a blog, consumingcyberpunk.com, and I'm currently writing Hack the Planet, which is Cli-Fi cyberpunk mashup. And Banana.
Hi, I'm Banana, and I am currently publishing a Judge Dredd card game called Block War. Hey.
At some
Love
point
it.
we should talk about that some more, because every time you say it, I get really excited.
Yeah. Super excited. Yeah. I just
I'm
think of
glad.
Carl Urban's chin, and I'm like, yes!
My excitement's like dwindling every day.
Yeah.
There's a potential topic as well, like the ups and downs of the publishing cycle.
We
Yes. Oh,
could
damn.
name that episode "How to Stay Hype." Maintain the hype.
Yeah. So people out in Streamland, how is the sound balance between me and everybody else? Does it sound okay? Let me know in the chat if it's off. I know that for probably the first time, you can hear and see everybody well from the start of the episode, which is, well, let's not jinx it. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the edges, right?
The fringes of cyberpunk.
Fringes.
The French.
Which is a topic very close to my heart in my day job. I study borders and borderlands and kind of liminal spaces, so I think about them a lot from a kind of theoretical perspective. I don't necessarily think about them from a cyberpunk perspective all the time, though. I feel like in the show notes, Fraser has the most written down, so maybe he should start us off with some thoughts on things that you think are at the edge of cyberpunk and interesting
Sure,
ways.
sure. So, even though I don't have it on my notes, what I just did the first of a series called Cyberpunk 101 Defining Cyberpunk, and in that article, which I've condensed from a academic essay, that person argues that cyberpunk is more defined by a set of particular motifs that are reoccurring within all of the at least first wave cyberpunks, and that's kind of what draws it together, even if you can kind of trace all of these specific motifs and themes to other genres, the way that they're assembled and reinforce each one to make a solid foundation of what it's trying to explore is the quote unquote best way at the time to define it. However, I will put a caveat on that, which was, I believe this thing was the original essay, although published in Beyond Cyberpunk, which came out just a couple of years ago as an academic book collecting a whole bunch of essays. I'm pretty sure the original essay is old from what I could read of it. I'm pretty sure it's 96, 97 or something like that. So
old.
yeah. So Altered Carbon hadn't even come out then, right? So
I think even though the specifics might have changed, I think that idea though of how you think about a genre is a good one. It applies to, and I think that applies far beyond just cyberpunk as well.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
dystopian futures. Not every dystopian future is a cyberpunk future, but it's definitely
not
part
all-
of it, right?
Is all cyberpunk dystopian?
Yeah,
Is that
that's-
is
That's a yeah. That's a good question. I would say originally, yeah, but is that the case anymore?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think
Originally-
increasingly not the way that people are taking it.
Yeah, it seemed like from that person's essay, they were arguing more about going into micro spaces. Being in technological states is what defines it more than. I actually don't even think he talked about dystopias all that much, except that it contrasted from Star Trek at the time, where it was like everything is beautiful in space, it's all white and clean and shit, and Cyberpunk was like, nah, this shit dirty unless you're rich. So, yeah.
Have you guys read William Gibson's The Gernsback Continuum? I think it's in.
No.
I think.
Is that a short story?
It's a short story. I think it's in Burning Chrome.
I've read Burning Chrome, but it was a very long time.
Yeah, maybe not. It's in Mirror Shades for sure. I think that was one of the first things he wrote, and it's explicitly kind of this reaction against like that 1960s. Everything is going to be shiny and cool like the Jetsons, and there'll be no problems, and everything's great. But kind of rather than the thing he does with Cyberpunk, where he invents this new world where that's not the case, but he takes that and kind of, I don't know, it's weird and hard to describe. This kind of like the protagonist is having these flashes and visions of this weird space, of this perfect space that's flashing into his reality in a kind of strange way that is, I don't know. I didn't like it the first time I read it, but when I read it subsequently, I did. I'll try and find a reference for that.
Yeah. So if we think of it in terms of like a collection of motifs that reinforce the core, I really like that a lot, because then there's room to insert different motifs and remove them, and presumably the author can use these new motifs to talk about the same issues and stuff like that. So I thought that was neat. The first thing that I could find that kind of was a cyberpunk derivative, I use that loosely because it's still an iteration, but is classified as a derivative academically, was Vert. Did anyone read that?
No, I've heard of it though.
Yeah, it's really weird. I started reading it and I was like, whoa. It, so far, a couple chapters in, is got the same sort of feel where they use a lot of jargon that doesn't exist yet to establish like a counterculture, subculture space. But the weird thing about it is it's called, or classified by other people, I don't think at the time it was, but it's called dream punk. So you could think of Inception as kind of the same thing, I think. But basically all these drugs are, from what I can tell so far anyway, encapsulated onto feathers, and then people ingest the feathers, and that's how they imbibe this drug. And then they take certain different kinds of trips, except that depending on what you're taking, that's what makes the sort of cyberspace environment, the microspace that you're entering. So it kind of was the first that I could tell to use the same motifs except to explore like a different kind of liminal space. And it's written very Britishy, so it was hard to understand a little bit. It seems a lot of knowledge about Manchester that I didn't have, especially 96 slang. In that, it uses like a lot of whatchamacallit, like gang terminology and stuff that in America people were like, what? But that apparently just made them like it even more, because it made it even more like foreign and enticing and stuff like that. And apparently that series went on for a while, and now I actually have the Vert RPG that just came out this year. That is Cortex Prime system, and so that'll be my first Cortex game actually.
Is that a third party?
I think it is a small time ish publisher that formed to do it, and it has directly whatchamacallit, they have paid the actual author to do parts of it and stuff like that. So it's like an official thing that involves the author, which is kind of neat. But I've been holding off reading that book so I could get through the original novel at least. But yeah, and similar to Shadowrun, there's different forms of humanoids in it apparently, but I haven't gotten that far, so I don't know if that's a later development in the series or what. But that's also the number one thing that people generally message me about when I'm like, what are some weird cyberpunk novels, like challenge me, and then people are just like, sure. And I'm like, what is it, like Gazoom type? So yeah, so far it's interesting. I managed to get a copy fairly cheap. I had it on my watch list for like a little while because it's really hard to get here, and one of those books I don't think I can get on Kindle in Canada at least. So that's was kind of my boundary for it.
Was it made in the 80s?
It was 96, I think, is when it
Okay.
was first published.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a little bit. Let me check.
Your description of it reminds me of this movie I can't remember the name of. I think it was like a new wave music movie with like very like soft 80s like new wave aesthetics and like post-punk. But it was like they were in a dream, but they were in a club, and like it was all like club kids. It's
that
like
seems very on point. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very famous. I can't. It's like maybe like Electric Dreams or like I can't. It's very famous. You would know what I'm talking about, but I think. What's
Do
that?
you remember who, like, what other movies are similar or like directed by the same person? Like,
It's like it's a cult hit. It's a standalone thing. Yeah, it's like I don't know, like my new wave DJ friend Jody would know exactly what it is, but like I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
I feel
But yeah, I think that's like part of that aesthetic, like that soft like shoegaze new wave like thing with like I don't know.
Yeah, I think somebody said there was some kind of visual adaptation to it. And so it might even be directly linked. I'm not sure. Also, Matthias in the chat said it's Cipher System, not Cortex. So it's my first Cipher System game.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I'll be interested in that because that's the Numenera, and I haven't ever played Numenera either. So
Yeah,
Nice.
we'll see how it goes. It's a very beautiful book too. There's lots of there's tons of artwork. I think it's triple column though, and that's just like triple columns, double column and triple column. I just wish it would die so much. But,
So-
yeah.
There were a couple of movies that when you were describing that, and particularly talking about it like being seen in Manchester, that I was thinking of, and I wonder if these are the same movies. One of these is the movie that you were thinking of, Kira. Is it Human Traffic,
No.
or is it 24-Hour Party People?
No.
Okay.
oh,
Because those
No,
are a couple of like 90s rave culture movies that.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
are more 90s. The one I'm talking about is definitely more 80s.
Okay.
Like
Oh, I
it
see.
is 100% 80s. But like yes, like 90s like Monster is like to me the quintessential clip with Macaulay Culkin.
that's so good.
It looks like the book was published in '94, so it'd be around the same time as Trouble and Her Friends and stuff. So just about 2 years after post Cyberpunk started. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
That would be a reaction to that.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Although, given the way that publishing cycles work, it's always tricky to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how Gibson, when he gave an interview, he was like, everyone was so shocked when all this cyberpunk started dropping, and he's like, if you knew what was going on, it wasn't shocking at all, because we were basically all networking, communicating with each other. We all showed each other our manuscripts and worked on it with one another, and then we all happened to apply to get these things published around the same times, and that's why they dropped like within a year to 3 of each other's stuff.
Yeah, I've never really kept up with like the short story circuit, but I feel like if you like read a lot of short stories and follow like the people who are getting Hugo noms for short stories, then it's easier to kind of see what's coming, because they're all trying these things out before in that sort of format, let alone their own little writing circles or knowing each other or what have you.
Yeah. The movie's called Liquid Sky. I found it.
Oh, I want to
But
see
that's
that.
actually it's about aliens. An alien creature invades New York's punk subculture in its search for an opiate released by the brain during orgasm.
It sounds like a Repo Man.
It is, but it's got like these aesthetics, like these neon punk aesthetics that look
Oh, I
very
love this.
cyberpunk. Yeah.
Oh, I love these. Okay.
Yeah.
Years before Jeff Noon, so maybe he was just, freebasing some stuff and watching.
Yeah, I mean, that
Obvious.
could have been the inspiration. Who knows? Drugs, drugs and neon and music.
Yeah. Well, as far as I've gotten, which isn't much, it starts with a crew trying to do a drug buy that goes wrong, and the police in it is super cool. They're called, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're called like ghost police or something like that. But you literally can't see them, and when they're starting to look for you, it's got like they have like searchlights that go over you because some people exist in like different spaces and stuff like that. The aesthetic of what is described is very cool, and then everything is described in a sort of like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas way, where it's all very like trippy and weird and stuff like that. Like they have somebody doing some kind of drug, which is referred to as the creature from outer space, continually. Yeah, and when they try to offload this drug to get into their flat or whatever, they have to carry the creature from outer space up these stairs. The lights go out, and now there's like these dream snakes that when the lights go out, they can like attack you or something. And it's sort of alluded to that these snakes kind of are pushed out from the dream space as the like garbage of that space or something like that, and can like attack you. So
that's such a drug thing. You see snakes when you do some hallucinogens or whatever, mushrooms.
Yeah, so far I'm just like, this is interesting, but I have no idea what's going on.
So do you think it's cyberpunk? And if not, like where or how does it relate to the Edge thing?
So far it definitely has the punk aesthetic, but I haven't seen any high-tech stuff whatsoever beyond the sort of whatever the police might be using with their technology. But it's hard to know if it's technology or if it's like some sort of hallucinogen where this guy is interpreting the police to look in that way, or if they actually do have these cool technology where they're ghosting around with spotlights and shit like that. It's hard to say. But the punk aesthetic is super there.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean sometimes, like when the novel's starting or whatever, you don't really know what all the implications of a thing are and whether it's going to be technological, whether it's going to turn out to be magical or something like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I gotta say that drugs are one of those things that like is definitely like at the core of cyberpunk from the beginning, but is the last thing I think of.
Yeah.
Why?
Probably because I'm not really in drug culture in any way. It's never really been part of my like life. So I just like but it occurs frequently enough in cyberpunk stuff that I would legitimately put it at the center, like the interaction of psychotropic drugs and things that enhance your mental abilities and all that kind of stuff, like is sort of like really early biotech in a way, I guess, right? Chemistry, better living through chemistry kind of stuff.
That's what I was going to say. Biotech and biopunk seems to clearly have stemmed from there, where they were just like, okay, well, I guess we should stop talking about drugs, but also different drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of drugs as being technology, like prescription drugs and medical ways that we, like, my partner has type 1 diabetes, so he lives on insulin. I always think of that as a very cyberpunk thing. It's like, his body is modified by the drug.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an example of technology that modifies human existence, even if it doesn't do it in an sort of, even if it doesn't necessarily fit with the usual aesthetic. But when you go to kind of psychotropic drugs and like hallucinogenics, then all of a sudden that can very easily become part of the usual kind of aesthetic, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah, that I always think of that as being the K-Dick realm, though, in sci-fi.
Yeah,
I
that's
hear you.
true.
Like
Yeah.
I tend to do, even though it definitely still belongs 100% in cyberpunk.
Uh-huh.
I always pre-associate over to.
Yeah,
Chaotic.
like the trailing edge of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Right. Yeah, becoming, I guess, more physical in cyberpunk, and then in later things, maybe where instead of drugs that modify behavior, it'll be like a physical thing in your brain that pokes your neurons in some way to
Yeah.
stimulate
I guess-
something.
I guess like the internet was kind of a psychotropic drug, though. Like the concept of the internet, like it's like a hallucination, a shared hallucination that we
Yeah.
can all dive into, right?
I mean, that's exactly how Gibson described it, right? Cyberspace is a shared hallucination. Yeah.
A consensual one.
Yep. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I mentioned this. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I think I talked about I must scream, but I have no mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like dystopian. That's like super dystopian.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think...
I feel like.
I
Oh,
think-
sorry. What were you saying?
I think you spoke about that on, like, in our Twitter, didn't you? In our private DMs. I didn't know if you talked
did
about
I?
that. I don't
Oh, I don't remember.
think you talked about it on the stream, so maybe you should talk about it now.
Yeah. Have any of you read it or heard
I-
about it or?
I looked up the Wikipedia page when you brought it up. Like, I'd heard of it, but I hadn't read it.
Yeah.
I only know why I watched that video on it that you posted, so I kind of know the outline of the plot. I also know just from being a nerd that he had written it in one day. That was like a famous thing where he wrote it overnight and then won some awards for it, and everybody / his peers were like, "I fucking hate you." Yeah.
Yep, that's legit.
It is very like gross and gory.
Yeah.
But it's like basically all of humanity's been destroyed by the supercomputer, and the supercomputer saved like 5 people and have trapped them in this gross dystopian world, and the supercomputer is basically torturing them for its own existence. So that's like the entire story.
Yeah, I feel like that's a genre in and of itself, like supercomputer dystopia.
Yeah.
Like the famous scene in 2001: Space Odyssey with the supercomputer on the spaceship or whatever.
What,
Sorry,
I
can't do that, Dave.
Terminator.
Yeah, Terminator. Yeah, this is quintessential.
Yeah, I feel like as soon as one person was like technophobia, people were like, "I'm down with that." Like 20 years.
Computers are scary.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's not like it's a part of cyberpunk, but it's not cyberpunk, right? Because it's what were you gonna say?
Go ahead.
Because it's not. There isn't like a like it's us against technology. It's not like us against ourselves. If that makes any sense. Like there's no inequality or anything that's discussed. It's mostly just like anti-technology.
Is the technology integrated at all into the people, into the surviving humans?
No. So like, have you seen? I think it was like Lucy or something like that, where she just like
Oh, yeah.
No, I
has
didn't.
these like weird powers and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
mind melds everything. It's like that. So that's what the supercomputer is like.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 No, that's why I didn't see Lucy, because it did that. What's that, like, myth? Oh, that, like, the we only use 10% of our brain myth, which is, like...
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
And it was,
stupid. Oh
I
my
was like,
god,
no,
it was
I
so
don't want
bad.
to see this.
It was one of the worst movies. I remember being like, "Oh, cool, this will be good," and then it was one of the first movies where I was like, "I know I paid money for this, but I'm not sure if this
no.
is worth it."
And
I
it's like
might-
Luke,
yeah.
it's like Luc Besson too, right? Like
Yeah.
how could he fail that hard?
I mean, I guess maybe that was the first sign. Well, no, it probably wasn't the first sign, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it drifts into like body horror, like there's a genre of cyberpunk that is body horror, like where the machines are monsters, and the thing about it is that it can invade your body, and like
Mhm.
a lot of Black Mirror is about that too.
Mhm.
I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, that theme of, like, technology penetrating the body and like invading you in various ways is, I think that's pretty cyberpunk. It's definitely part of it, but yeah. I think it's easy to take that and then do horror.
Yeah.
And you're not really
Yeah.
talking about society, and I feel like I want cyberpunk to talk about society in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That in particular was one of the motifs that was prevalent in that that essay that the guy wrote about, and he said a lot of that was in reaction to what sci-fi was doing at the moment, and he wanted to make it like personal, so they used tropes from horror to make it personal and make the reader empathize and be like, oh shit, this could be happening to me right now. And apparently it really worked, because people were like, oh shit, this is scary. But my favorite cyberpunk is where technology is neutral, and it's used on both sides or appropriated from one side to the other, and then the overall whatever the actual thing is talking about is little to do with specifically a kind of technology, and more to do with like the human condition and stuff. That's my favorite.
I like it when it's a tool that is used for oppression that can be subverted by the people who are being oppressed, and in the kind of like the streets have their own uses for things. Like anything that can be used against us can be used for us, kind of thing. So ultimately neutral, as you say.
Yeah, and it's definitely a do-it-yourself thing that people have hit on a lot. What are some other stuff people were thinking about?
Well, what Vanna just said drifts well into one of mine, which is Blade.
It's so good. Nice. I actually just bought the box set of Blade. I haven't watched it yet, though.
I mean, there's definitely a subculture there.
So I love vampires and I love technology. Put the two together, you get Blade.
And Underworld.
The technology in Blade.
I think it's definitely cyberpunk, because it is more like in the horror genre of cyberpunk, like the body modification part, which is one of my favorite parts of cyberpunk, obviously. But because if you become a vampire, you're completely changed, and it's vampire technology. And then they have all this weird like blood tech that they use, like they have high-tech sunscreen so the vampires can go outside, and Blade has all these cool weapons that he uses to like blow up vampires through fast blood mutation and stuff like that. And like it's got the cyberpunk gothic aesthetic. It's got like the club scenes and the neon and the cars and the cool like trench coats, and punk clothing, basically. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's a fringe cyberpunk for me.
As far as the aesthetic is concerned, I think you're 100% spot on. Like that whole, like just about everything from World of Darkness, for that matter, or like the vampire part of World of Darkness anyway, like has that kind of same in the Matrix as well, like that it's particular type of cyberpunk aesthetic.
It's cyber goth in particular, which is my era of cyberpunk. And I was going to goth clubs dressing up like a cyberpunk during those movies, and like they played the blood rave on the dance floor.
That's a good track.
But classic cheesy stuff. But also the cool thing about Blade is that it stars It stars a black man, right? And he is fighting an oppressive regime. Like he is a cyberpunk hero in a lot of ways. He's just doing it with like lots of guns and violence, as opposed to necessarily, he uses some technology, but it's mostly like his vampire powers, I guess, that get him through things most of the time.
Well, that was the first movie I thought was really interesting too, because they introduced vampirism as specifically a retrovirus, right? Where it has been modified and stuff like that, and augmented by vampiric kind to do what they want to do with it, right? So it is kind of biotechnology aspects of it, because before, I think it's even alluded to that like the vampires that have survived is because they've made this specific kind of virus, and now they're the best, right?
Yeah, the villain is like a cyberpunk. vampire, and like he has like hacker vampires working for him, and like, you know, they have like this secret vault that holds all this ancient vampire technology that they keep like under, like they have to heist the vault. I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting combination of things.
Okay, well, it's been great, but we've got to go now because I've got to go watch Blade. Oh man, that might just be what I'm doing tomorrow.
I love that movie so much.
Do you like Blade 1 or 2 better?
Oh, I was having this conversation yesterday with somebody. It is hard. Blade 1's probably better, but Blade 2 is directed by Guillermo del Toro, which if you go back and watch it, you can see some proto Guillermo del Toro happening in there. Like it's pretty cool, like the creature design and like scenes that are shot in sewers, kind of like in Hellboy and stuff like that.
Nice. Totally.
Yeah.
The second one, I remember when my brother and I watched it, we were like, "Wow!"
Yeah. Also, does the soundtrack count? Does the soundtrack make something cyberpunk? Because like it's techno, and then the soundtracks just get better because they start fusing R&B, like rap and techno and hip hop, and it's just like in house. It's so good.
Wouldn't that make half of the movies of the '90s cyberpunk? I think that's a bit. I mean, I think that's definitely part of the aesthetic for sure, though.
Right.
I still remember that song in my head when they gear up and they start going to the club, right? I can't stop.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And in the third movie with I can't remember her name, Jessica Alba? No, Jessica Biel, I think his name. When she goes and kills vampires, she techno music.
That is
the third one, right?
That is a rich vein of imagery that I need to plunder. I am totally going to watch all of those before NeonCon, and then channel that shit when I run the sprawl down there.
Yes.
Man. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's actually. I don't know.
I like how all of this. So I like to think that all of this pop culture has birthed synthwave, even though I know it probably didn't. Like I know. I didn't do a lot of research on synthwave, but I figured that it was probably born out of all these movies and TV shows or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Synthwave is like retro synth.
Like, yeah, it's
music.
like retro future synth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like takes the synth from the 80s and does it with like higher definition sound or whatever.
Yeah, but also bring in like game sound type stuff as well. Like, I'm
That's true,
super excited to like look through the list of panels that are going to be on at NeonCon and see some like synthwave people talking about what they imagine retrofuturism to be. Like, I imagine there'll be a lot of stuff I totally disagree with, but that's fine.
Kavinsky or whatever is the synthwave. I don't know. You know synthwave better than me, Banana. I feel like.
Well, okay, so so I know a little bit about synthwave, but it's mostly vaporwave that I know more about, and Wish House, which I like. They're all like interconnected, but not really. And I think that vaporwave, I think, is a little more. So I know this is gonna strike a chord with some people, but I think that vaporwave is more cyberpunk than synthwave.
All right.
I agree. Actually, I agree with you.
Shit's gonna go down.
I'm ready to back this up.
Mostly because vaporwave is super like anti-commercialism, all that stuff, and they use like symbols and like Japanese characters in their band names and their titles so that no one can find them. It feels sort of like, whereas with synthwave, you can definitely find all of those titles online, and they don't have that same thought process.
Do you know of any, or could you assemble like a YouTube playlist of like comparison between the two, Banana?
Ooh.
Oh,
like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, like not for like now, but for us to listen to and talk about that more in the future. Because like I really don't like. I don't know what the difference is.
I know nothing.
To be fair, but I'd love to know what the difference is. Especially if artists are like hiding themselves with symbols. That is sweet.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that like Witch House does something similar as well, but instead of like Japanese characters, they actually use like symbols. So you have to have like alt codes and all this other stuff.
What?
Yeah.
That sounds so cool.
It's super cool because it's like secretive. It's like creating a ritual just by like making the band name, you know? It's like very like dark and witchy just by like, I'm using a secret language. You have to decipher to find me. Like,
Yeah,
and this
exactly.
yeah, it's the same with Vaporwave being like I think it was like Nine Inch Nails that did the first like freeware music or whatever, like to share their internet for free, their music for free on the internet.
Oh, I remember when people were freaking out about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly
yeah,
the first like big name to do it. Yeah.
What's that?
Certainly the first like big name to do it. Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
a big deal. Yeah, it was a totally big deal when they did it.
Yeah, I guess to popularize the idea. And yeah, good point. There's probably other people doing that. Vaporwave reminds me of that, where it's just like specifically a culture that's happening on the internet. Like, and that's, yeah, that's so cyberpunk.
I can't believe I haven't heard of this, like, these, like, alt symbols and stuff like that. I feel like I'm so old again now.
Freezer.
Oh God!
Freezer.
Wow.
Back when, like, Leet was really big, right? And everyone was like, ha 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 ha.
Were you born when Elite was big?
No, Leet was big when I was like 20 or something like that.
Wow.
And like we all, like I was even reading like Mega Tokyo, and Mega Tokyo had Leet Speak in it, right? So if you, they had full pages of Leet Speak. So if you didn't know how to read it, you would just be like, although it wasn't like Leet Speak was like hard to figure out. Like the whole point was that it was very intuitive anyway. So, but yeah, now the kids have something new.
Yeah, that's Snapchat.
Eric Fulgaris on the chat wants to know if technology is truly neutral.
Yes.
Ooh.
Absolutely. 100%. It's totally neutral. Language is technology. Language is a technology, and that's neutral.
My argument about technology being not truly neutral is that most of it comes from the military-industrial complex.
I mean, isn't that a use you put to it? I mean, totally, absolutely, 100%. Like for
where it comes from, though.
Yeah,
that's like, you know, we only have drones because they blow things up, but
Sure.
we can also use them for video. Like, what if we create technology from other things, basically?
Yeah, I think a lot of technology is definitely produced by privileged people, but not all of it either.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, just because the privileged people are super into it / the military doesn't. I don't know. I'm on the side of it being a use, but I'm a white guy, so I don't know.
I mean, I think about whenever I hear people talk about this, and I hear this a lot actually because I'm a classicist and I'm in digital humanities, so I'm on a kind of like technological edge of a rather traditional field, but one that has been using technology a lot for a long time. I take a much like broader view of technology, and whenever somebody criticizes this, I think about Socrates complaining that people were writing down his lectures and that this was going to like rot their mind.
Absolutely.
So like, there's a ton of technologies right now in sort of late capitalism. I think the origin of a lot, but not all, of high-tech technology comes from like the military-industrial complex, as you say, and therefore that's sort of like deeply problematic in the uses they're using for it. The verse being repurposed by everybody else, like that's definitely a thing to be aware of and think about. But I don't think the technology itself is like bad or good, but like until it becomes sentient, and then I guess it will be either bad or good, just like people, I guess.
I mean, but are people really bad or good?
Yeah, well, that's the question.
Yeah, well, I like that solar punk is like a reaction to that notion too, right? With like the idea that people with very little means, now that technology has permeated its way throughout through globalization, they can do very much with very little and also use it to start repairing things. Like people have fertilizer from the different metals that we can't get rid of with recycling and stuff like that. I just read I'm reading right now Glass and let me look at my notes. Glass and Gardens, which is a solar punk anthology, which is very cool. And the entire point of it is just to probe the edges of the genre in order to define it. So it's cool. Like at the very beginning, they're just like, who knows what solar punk is? We're still figuring it out. But here's like 20 stories where we think that we're kind of like, engaging with it and trying to define it as best we can. So it's cool that solar punk is so much in its infancy that in the age where the internet is the way it is, so many people can contribute to it, and you can see that totally in this anthology. There's tons of like the one that I'm reading right now, the main character has like Zer pronouns, right? So it's just really cool that so many people can submit to this this Kickstarter that happened, and then suddenly they're all actively engaging with a new subgenre from cyberpunk.
Is that how the whole anthology was formed? Did they sort of crowdsource the whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and they're doing another one right now, I think. And then the first one that was the like main meat or whatever of the Kickstarter is a translated anthology from Brazilian anthology people, and it's really good as well.
I'm just gonna turn on a light real quick
Yeah.
because it's getting dark over here.
Yeah.
I think that's my ideal way to use the internet, like bringing people all over the world to tell stories together. Like that's so awesome, powerful, especially like in a futuristic genre.
Yeah. And I wouldn't want to say that despite the internet's origin in the military-industrial complex, and the many like bad uses that it has put, that overall it is like bad or anything. Like I think
I thought it was funded by the military complex, but CERN was the one that created it. No?
It was originally set up to do American military stuff, wasn't it?
I thought it was like to communicate somehow.
I think that's a misconception from Americans who thought that they were the ones that invented it when CERN did it first.
Oh.
I think the first prototype is just from CERN, and then America used that and adapted it
Sure.
from the military. I think. I don't know.
Both of these sound correct to me.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Well, if anyone has some knowledge to drop in the chat, then go ahead. Otherwise, we'll have to look this up later. Yeah, I know there must be like histories, like pretty like in-depth historical like analysis of the creation of the internet, but I have not read it. That is well past my time.
Well, and just to clarify, I mean, just because something comes from someplace not so great doesn't mean that it itself isn't great. But I think that we'd be creating different technology if it came from medical or ecological, or whatever places. Like if we didn't have like a colonialist viewpoint of technology, right? Like I think that's where, and I know that technology is different for every culture and every time, but I think when we're talking about cyberpunk technology, that then we're looking at the post-capitalist situation that we're.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I mean, Finland there's a reason why they're making the kind of technology that they are, and America is making the stuff that they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's where like there's like this role-playing game called Unhallowed Metropolis, which is a gothic role-playing game with vampires and zombies and stuff, and it posits that what if it's an alternate universe, what if the Victorians started making biotechnology instead of steam technology, and because the train is the beginning of what the Anthropocene, the era that we're living in now, and the technology that we have, the steam train. And so what if that didn't happen? Well, the world will be filled with zombies. The game says. But yeah, it's like a biotech alternate universe. I think that, I don't know, interesting thoughts about technology. I always think about that when I think about technology being good or evil.
Yeah, that's neat. Banana, do you have something that you want to talk about? I don't see your notes.
That's because I forgot to fill it out. I'm trying to think. Like, what's something I consumed recently that was.
Well, we could talk about Upgrade, right?
We could talk about Upgrade.
Because
I did also
blew
want
my
to troll.
mind.
I also did want to troll Hamish with a question about Sailor Moon and if it's cyberpunk.
I would say no, but I'd also say that I haven't watched Sailor Moon. I don't remember Sailor Moon being cybernetically enhanced, but if she was, then send me the stuff right now.
The reason why I think that she's cyberpunk is because she uses technology from the moon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the thing with technology, like, I mean, I always think, okay, sure, maybe this X thing is cyberpunk. But if it's just because it uses technology, then what else do we have to then say is also cyberpunk because it uses technology in the same way?
Well, they're definitely counterculture, though, right? Sailor Moon.
Is it?
I think they're like defeating oppressors or something, right? Aren't they?
Yeah, they're the evil queens or whatever. I don't know.
But then, is any story in which someone uses technology to defeat an oppressor?
So actually, now that I think about it, because
Okay.
she's also like the queen of the moon, so she's like kind of the oppressor.
So it's really just about global geopolitics or solar politics.
I'm gonna have to think about this a little bit.
Maybe Sailor Moon is proto-solar punk.
Hey, yeah.
But yeah, Upgrade. Sorry.
And I just wrote a review on that today, and yeah, I loved it. Even with you were like, yeah, this is weird, and it like, defied my expectations. I was like, oh yeah, we'll see. Let's see. 'Cause I was expecting it to be what you were talking about, but it's also a lot more. Like I found it very clever, and it utilizes a lot of different tropes to great effect to continually subvert expectations. And I just add, it's like the best movie I've ever seen that like slow burn introduced you to counterculture in any setting that I've ever seen. It's like, especially because it's from the perspective of like the everyman guy, right? Where he's like, oh yeah, drones suck. Like he's specifically supposed to be the embodiment of a technophobe in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then like, yeah, he's like, drones suck and chips take away jobs from factories and all that kind of stuff. But his kind of like downward descent into the counterculture and the hackers and stuff like that was so much more enticing to me, because we have no idea in the movie that those things exist at all because of his like obstinate view towards technology throughout it,
Mm-hmm.
Is this movie on Netflix in the US?
No, it comes out in 2 weeks unless you get it digitally. Then it's out now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, what did you want to say about it?
I think the big reveal at the end, that was like what really made it just like, whoa, oh my god, like why did I think this was going to be a bad movie? But yeah, it was intense. I don't want to like spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but it gets to like very cyberpunky, cyberpunky themes.
And like you said, it was interesting that the technology is like Gibsonian level stuff, but now, right? Which makes it even more interesting. Like the metropolis that he's in, the city just looks like a normal city, except there's lots of drones around, right? They're always like, there's a drone coming. But other than that, it's just here and now, because we have smart home technology right now. Like that was literally my job. So
right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that it just it's just very clever. It takes like the initial motifs of cyberpunk and then just like plays around with it the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very pretty too.
yeah, the lighting is very nice.
Yeah. Well,
sure, you would like it.
Yeah.
I want to watch it now. I was just Googling where to watch it,
Yeah,
but I can't find anywhere.
I think it came out on the 1st of June or something, so it's probably left theaters.
Yeah, I don't think it's in theaters anymore.
Yeah, maybe it'll be on Amazon or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. It drops on Blu-ray on the 28th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Well, it sounds like
fast.
it's worth picking up based on your.
Yeah. I watched it and then pre-ordered it. So yeah. It's like, what the fuck?
Cool.
Yeah. What else
I'm
did you
into it.
like about it?
I'm trying to think. Like the hacker part, that part was probably my favorite, aside from the ending, the big reveal. Like those two parts were my favorites. And I think just like the way that they incorporate this like odd technology with now, it's like it makes sense almost, like it just doesn't feel like it's too off, like this could happen tomorrow type thing. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. The only thing I didn't like about it was the sort of like villain guy. They always Cyberpunk like has a problem with making the villains like these super like antisocial male guys who don't know how to talk to anybody because they're like stuck in the computer all their lives and stuff. And that was the only thing where I was like, roll eyes. But everything else was good, right? Where he's like, sorry, I don't get out of the house much. I'm like Bill Gates, you know, it's times 20. I have millions of dollars. I started my own enterprise. You know, I was typing when I was a fetus, that kind of stuff.
But when like thinking about the spoiler, I'm wondering if that's what like the technology told him to do. I don't know. Maybe it was just like, you know, looking too much into it, but
yeah,
probably
it
not.
was definitely it was definitely interesting the way that they did that. And yeah, I still am a little unsure if this person is not Tom Hardy, to be honest. But
Pretty sure it's just Tom Hardy.
yeah.
It would be the greatest trick that Tom Hardy has ever played on humanity.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I like about it is even in the description of the movie, they're like, this person's a self-proclaimed technophobe and all that kind of stuff. Like they literally go out of their ways to define this person as a technophobe. So it's interesting that the technology is his only form of empowerment, and the same for STEM, whatever the acronym is, right? Without STEM is just a chip without him, and he is empowered by STEM, otherwise a quadriplegic, right? So it's like, I felt it was like more neutral presentation of technology than normal, where they're just like RoboCop, right? Where he's just like,
Right, yeah.
I have these things and I kill you now. Because I can, and America bad, you know.
Yeah. I wonder, like, almost if it tanked on purpose just to be more cyberpunk. I don't know.
We'll show you. We'll be a cult film.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot like Mr. Robot in some ways.
A little bit.
Mr. Robot's like much more like hard sci-fi, right? With the tech where they are overly concerned with explaining that this is a plausible thing that's happening in the plot.
Yeah. Yeah, and like that's
kidding
true.
And stuff.
Yeah, showcasing like stuff like that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really cool. And it's like the more the plot unravels, the dirtier it gets as well, which I also liked a lot.
Oh, I like it when movies do that and they take you down the dark hole. Sorry, Vanna, I interrupted you.
Do you think Mr. Robot's cyberpunk?
Yes,
oh, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I haven't seen it. Should I disagree?
You haven't
So, like,
seen
what?
it?
Wow.
What?
That is one of my media inspirations
really good.
for my game, for Sync,
Oh, cool.
actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I
because,
love that.
well, Mr. Robot and hackers have a lot of DNA in common.
Oh, yeah.
As far as like just showcasing like the underground hacking scene, you know what I mean? As like a subculture and working against the man. Being like these big corporations who are doing evil things that they want to, they want to seek justice for. So it's a very like, they're hacktivists.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's lots of terminology flown around that you can tell that they're somewhat attempting to educate people about actual hackers, like
Yeah.
white hats and black hats, gray hats, and all that kind of stuff going on. Rootkits and lots of different technological phrases and stuff. It's a great show.
Yeah, and they should. Oh, go ahead.
Is it on
sorry.
Netflix?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not Netflix. Sorry. I don't think it's on Netflix. Was it?
It was on.
Oh, maybe it is.
It was somewhere
okay.
watchable because that's how I watched it.
Alright.
It's on. It's on.
Oh, it's on
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If
So
you're
I'm
in
like-
the U.S.
I'm like wondering if time has anything to do with like what makes something cyberpunk. So like I always assumed that it has to be like this weird retro future in order for something to be cyberpunk. But like I wasn't sure if like something that's modern is cyberpunk or something that's happening now is cyberpunk.
I think it's like the weird different waves thing that Fraser always talks about. Because there's there's the hyper ridiculous Mohawk 80s cyberpunk, and then there's like the darker Matrix 90s cyberpunk that's a little bit more real, Matrix hackers, and then there's the Peripheral or whatever by William Gibson, which is basically more or less set now. It's a post 9/11 cyberpunk. So I don't know. Is that correct, Fraser?
Yeah. So there's first wave cyberpunk, which is what we loosely do, like 82 to 92 ish, like proto-ish stuff to whenever Snow Crash came out in 92.
Mm-hmm.
And Snow Crash is post cyberpunk because it deconstructs and analyzes cyberpunk and then satirizes it essentially, poorly. But anyway.
Shots fired.
And then the third wave is it is essentially cyberpunk that is written post .com bubble exploding, from generally people understanding what the internet is like and that kind of stuff. It's basically was defined by I can't remember what the book is called, but the author specifically codified it as somebody who is injecting actual knowledge of the net into the story and not an extrapolated thing from the 80s that we see now. And so cyberspace sort of reflects where technology is going even more accurately than before, where it was kind of like, you're floating on the grid and all that kind of stuff going on. So those are the loose waves, but in my mind, even after first wave, if you just call something cyberpunk now, you're completely fine, unless you're going into genre theory, and that is just to point out to people specifically what kind of tropes that they might find in this story, and then that's the extent of its helpfulness, I think.
I generally want cyberpunk to be near future, but as the contemporary era has more in common with the near future of the 80s, then we slip into that kind of retro future past where it's like who knows what time it is and it's imaginary and it's branching off alternate things that didn't happen back then, and then it gets trickier, I guess. I kind of leave that space in the start of the sprawl when I have the conversation about, do you want your game to be about that kind of 80s thing and plugging things into your head, or do you want it to be about hacking into Wi-Fi networks? And for me, I guess if it's the more contemporary it is, the more I tend to think of it maybe as a techno thriller, if it doesn't have some sort of indication of future tech.
Like a Mission Impossible type thing?
Mission Impossible is it's...
Is it,
I mean, if they had cyberware, that would be the sprawl, basically. But they don't, so it's not. They do techno thriller heists. That's also, I don't watch Tom Cruise movies anymore.
Is Inception cyberpunk?
Inception? Well, what is the real time period of Inception?
I think so. I think it is.
I don't think we know enough about the setting of Inception to know anything about it.
Well,
that's
there is a dream technology, though, right?
Yeah, but what's the setting?
It doesn't. Does it matter? Does that matter?
If it's just dream technology, then is dream technology? That doesn't seem particularly cyberpunk to me.
Well, it's
Yeah.
high tech, low life though, right? Because there's still a subculture of thieves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In the
Oh,
dream.
that's what Inception was?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't see it.
I gotta
It's just
rewatch
a
it.
postmodern movie. It's
It's
just a
so-
postmodern movie about movies.
Yeah, it's like there's so many. It's like layers all the way down, and no, I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
it does seem like they're doing it technologically, so I guess I mean that would be a case where I would be like if somebody made a big list of cyberpunk things and put that in it, I'm not gonna like say this list is bullshit because it's got Inception on it. But if somebody said Inception is the ultimate cyberpunk movie, I'd be probably like, no, that's not.
Yeah.
The case. You know what I mean? This is what I kind of mean about like
Yeah.
the center and the edges. Like I don't think it
Yeah.
occupies a central place at the center of cyberpunk, but I'm happy for it to be in part of the big tent. Like as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
Like
it's like a branch off of the Matrix to me, because
Yeah,
the Matrix
yeah,
is
mhm.
people in dream pods, right?
Mhm,
And then
yeah.
so it's like, what is
Mhm.
reality and what is a dream, and it's all linked through technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Totally.
I feel like that's maybe a better example of my, like a concrete example of what I was trying to talk about before the show,
Yeah.
about like the center versus the periphery, and how things on the periphery totally matter and they can affect things at the center. But in terms of like what a genre is, I feel like it's more useful to think about like what the core is than like try and rigidly draw lines like, nope, Inception is on the other side, get out.
Yeah.
I don't think that's like useful, particularly if somebody thinks Inception is a fantastic cyberpunk movie and wants to make a cyberpunk game about it. Do it.
Well, cyberpunk is like in the hearts of movies now.
Cyberpunk
like,
is in the heart.
It is.
Yes.
It is in the heart. It's in your robot. But no, I mean, it's like you could draw a tree.
Yeah.
Like you could do that instead of like a circle.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
keeping things out. You could
Mhm.
say like, oh, it influenced this.
Mhm.
This and, there's bits of it here and there.
Yeah. Well, the
But I don't know. That's how I see it, I guess.
No, I like it. I was just thinking, like, I guess the network model, like the Deleuze and Guattari, to get like philosophical on it. Rhizome network model is more the way I
Oh.
like to think about it, rather than like a hierarchy, a tree like
Yes.
hierarchy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I was picturing a round tree.
Yes,
it's-
yes, a
It's
round
the
tree.
same. I guess it's still in the center or with
Mhm.
edges, but like no circular
Sure,
wall.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and exactly. And when this is why, like, because I hate like when I teach ancient history. There are a lot of maps potentially in ancient history. I virtually never present a map that has lines on it, like borders, because it's made up. Right, it's
Yeah.
just something that we invent to say, oh, this is the borderline. Because national borders didn't get invented until like the 17th century, basically. 17th century Europe invented national borders, and then nationalism and everything inside that. So before that, it's just like, well, we live in the city, and who knows what exactly the border is between these two things. It's the same in genres, like for me.
Yeah.
So like looking at the points and what this like core of a genre might be and how that might interrelate with some other genre over there. Like what do you get when you take like cyberpunk, whatever that might mean, and mix it with like rom-com over here, and then add in a little bit of horror from over here. Like what does that look like? Make that
That's
game,
really-
someone make that game.
Yes. That's really cool. I like your map and
I think about
Yeah,
maps a lot.
yeah. Well, in classics, you have to.
yeah. I wrote a piece about the death and the rebirth of cyberpunk, and I think I kind of pinpointed why people are so confused as to why cyberpunk is dead or not.
Yeah.
And I think what they're conflating the death of the movement with the death of a subgenre, right? You
Yeah.
can't necessarily kill a subgenre unless it goes stagnant and doesn't produce anything to literature that is worthwhile, which my posts are continuing to prove that it does. Anyhow, but the death of the movement happened because it was appropriated by mainstream culture, right? Like
Exactly like
So-
punk.
yeah, exactly. So
People argue Vivienne West is like, or whatever, the end of like high fashion is the end of punk.
yeah, and in 1992, they say that the death of punk is the Johnny Mnemonic movie, right? It
Right.
went mainstream, so it's dead now. And then various pieces of the movement got appropriated by popular culture. And then that's why we have cyberpunk aesthetic and we have a cyberpunk genre. And a lot of people conflate both things, the death of the movement and that, as well as the actual aesthetic with the subgenre as well. So it's a very fluid thing with a lot of people, or it's opposite and completely rigid because they think that it is the movement only, and so it's dead and only can take place within that rigid structure.
I think blaming the death of Cyberpunk on the Johnny Mnemonic movie is bullshit.
It's hilarious.
I mean, if you want to talk about Cyberpunk as a countercultural movement going like kind of mainstream,
yeah.
I mean, it's not really mainstream,
That's not it.
but like
That's
when like role playing games pick up your countercultural movement, like what is that?
No.
Yeah.
Like, and that was
that's
earlier.
still countercultural. Like,
Is it though?
I know, because it has to exist for long enough for nerds to be like, this is popular, right?
yeah.
But I don't know, because it's like a lot of role playing games are made about nerdy shit that nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
The
But is
only
it
role playing game
countercultural?
everybody knows about really is D&D anyway. So
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I think it's still subcultural. I think role playing games are too small.
Right. So maybe there's a difference there between subcultural and countercultural, where one is like, I don't know. When I think of countercultural, I think of something that's, I don't know, acting against the main culture. Whereas I think for the most part, role playing games are not. Role playing games are just reproducing the main culture, with exceptions.
They used to be, but I think you're right now. I think they are not countercultural anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think they used to be more countercultural now?
Absolutely. I mean, role-playing games were part of being like part of culture and punk. I mean, like people who played them and made them were subcultures and countercultures. So I don't think that's true anymore, although that does still exist, obviously, and has persisted over time, like Vampire, the role-playing game, being about basically goth culture in the 90s. I mean, that's what that game is about. And yeah, it's weird.
I mean, D&D is a pretty standard replication of, like, kind of Midwest capitalism in the 1970s and 80s.
It is.
So, like,
I mean, the game is about that, but I think it is a part of punk and metal culture. So I don't,
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where the way that the thing that created something, especially when it's something creative like a literary genre or role-playing games, that it will then get picked up by people and used for different things and applied in different ways, and is itself like a creative sort of entity that like spawns new and interesting things, and thus sort of like by definition is kind of like sub or countercultural maybe. Yeah. Even if the game itself is like not. I don't know.
I think like alternatively, like a lot of companies are also using, because the people that they hire, people with standing are now, they used to be role players or they used to play D&D. Now they're using role playing tactics and like, or mechanics in, say like hosting a workshop or doing things for clients. Like they're sort of using everything that they learned from role playing and like implementing that into making more money. So I don't know.
But also using those tools to do other more countercultural things as well. Speaking of things being tools, right?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part. I think it cut out.
If you were talking about like people using the tools that role-playing have given them to make money, and thus I'm like perpetuate a capitalist system, people also use it to do things like train activists and participate in other kind of like if we want to sort of circle back to the like art tools
like technology
like that's another thing. Like role playing is a technology. It's a set of tools that go together that we can speak of in the same way, and I think it's also neutral. You can make a game that glorifies fascist things, and you can make a game that is explicitly anti-fascist and anti-racist and like works to like make the world better. That doesn't mean that it doesn't say anything moral about the tool, I don't think.
Right.
Kira, how is Ancillary Justice cyberpunk? Because if it is, then I can put it on my list of reading much sooner. So I like that argument.
my very fast argument about Ancillary Justice being, I mean, the things I see, Ancillary Justice is a space opera, probably is the real genre, but
it's great.
It's an amazing book. You should read it.
Yep,
I loved
absolutely.
it. it does the thing where it has sentient spacecraft, and so the reason why back to the body modification thing being my favorite cyberpunk thing. Where can a consciousness live? What is a consciousness? Can it exist in multiple forms as like an AI? It's basically about an AI, the main character, and the AI exists in many bodies, but is one AI, and the many bodies are connected to a ship AI, and they're all the same thing. They're all the same person. They just live in different bodies, and they communicate over distance and space. And the main character is separated from the whole, and so it's about the idea of being a part of a larger consciousness as your identity, but not knowing what the rest of your consciousness is and trying to reconnect with it again. And that is like, whoa, I don't know. It's like so much about that's cyberpunk to me.
Yeah,
like
that sounds cool.
It's about it's a lot about gender identity too.
Mm-hmm.
She only uses she pronouns, which is not super progressive, but more progressive than using all he pronouns.
And that's a cultural feature of the particular culture that the AI was created in as well. Yeah.
Well, it's weird. Like they basically don't see gender, which is somewhat problematic, I think. But it's a cool thought experiment.
Mm-hmm. Have you read have you read Anne Leckie's other stuff?
No.
You should read Provenance, where there are at least 5 genders.
Cool. Yeah, that's more my jam.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's in the same universe.
Yeah.
It's after the 3. It's after the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole trilogy, I think, is good. The first one is definitely the best. Ancillary Justice.
I started the second one and put it down.
Okay. Yeah, I liked both Ancillary Sword and Ancillary Mercy. But then Provenance takes place after those.
Yeah.
And is a totally different kind of story, but is also really good and does like even more with the kind of gender stuff, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so that the idea of like a split and complex identity is in different parts of your identity maybe not communicating with each other is very much kind of like going back to Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, like the cyborg feminism and the idea that like a marginalized gender is full of intersections basically. And yeah, that just my brain connected those 3 things and said, oh, this is cyberpunk, this isn't space opera. Even though it is in the setting of opera and has a lot of the conventions of a space opera.
Right. I mean, you're looking at a guy who wrote a piece about how her was cyberpunk just to piss off a whole bunch of people.
Well, her... Wait, her is cyberpunk though, isn't it? What, I don't understand.
I think so. So, but
I don't like its sexism, but I think generally it's pretty cyberpunk.
Well, I think it's funny too, because when I'm like, oh yeah, it's cyberpunk, they're like, oh yeah, the guy is like pretty ostracized. I'm like,
no.
the girl, the entity that has Scarlett Johansson's voice is why it's cyberpunk, not because the guy is a sad panda gamer guy, right?
Right. So, like she's what I wish Joy was in Blade Runner 2049. Like that, I feel like the AI in her is a perfect way of pointing out like why buying an AI that serves you cannot be your equal partner. Like you're buying a slave. You're not buying a partner that's consenting. So,
yeah, and in much the same way that it's like 500 Days of Summer, you know how you always see guys being like, oh, I can't believe she did that to him, and they totally miss that he's being a douchebag, and throughout the entirety of their relationship is his fault, but guys are always like, oh, I can't believe she left him after he laid his heart out and stuff. It's a similar thing where, except it's an entity that grows beyond the confines of what humanity can even understand, and they're still like, can't believe she left him. And you're like, yeah. But I totally think it's cyberpunk. Yeah, like she liberated, or it liberated, or whatever pronouns you want to assign to it, liberated itself from humanity, and thank God, because that shit was fun. So yeah.
Also the idea of having like a million relationships at once or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
I loved that it was like a polyamorous
Yeah.
relationship thing. The thing where he asks like, "How many people are you in love with?" And she's like, 1,577,000 people, or something, right? And he feels like jealousy and stuff about that. So, yeah, I thought it was really good. Like, and it's set in like Shanghai, near future. Like it seemed like they were
Yeah.
definitely trying to get some near future action, like when they're playing the video game with the teddy bear.
Yeah.
It's like this VR environment thing. Once
Yeah,
again, him showing kind of what a douche he is.
Yeah. And it's got the wood panel aesthetic, the
Yeah.
late Tumblr era aesthetic that you know then you know what I'm talking about, like that.
Yeah.
And like you know that became like it was like the wood tech aesthetic that then shows up in things like 2049. You know what I mean? Like that aesthetic
Totally.
continued.
Mhm.
Yeah. I just love the way that you said it though. The late Tumblr
Late
aesthetic.
I feel like that's
Tumblr
where I was seeing it.
That
Like,
sort of nails it.
Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
before like Tumblr got bought by Yahoo or whatever.
Yeah. Boom. Codified.
Wait, is Tumblr dead?
I mean, after a lot of people left after it bought it.
Oh,
'cause it
really?
got too
I didn't even realize it got
commercialized.
bought. I don't think.
Yeah, it was maybe like 4 years ago, 5
wow.
years ago.
Oh wow.
It was a thing.
Well, what about Hamish? You haven't said much about your stuff.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm the grumpy old contrarian.
We like your contrarian ideas.
I wasn't saying it was like disapproved of. Yeah, no, I don't.
Hamish is our dark reflection for the things we're talking about.
The dark reflection in our mirror shades.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
I feel like we've
haven't-
fired a lot of shots in the show already.
The shots keep coming. Yeah, no, I don't think I really have. I mean, I haven't consumed very much Cyberpunk recently, except that I started playing Deus Ex, which I've started streaming here, and that's interesting. Mostly interesting for trying to get a 1998 game working on a 2017 PC, which is a thing. But that's particularly interesting because it's like it's laying a lot of pipe so far, and I'm only like 4 hours in for. Actually, I'm only like 1 or 2 hours in. Laying a lot of pipe for a big cyberpunk conspiracy, which is making me think a lot about conspiracies, which I've been thinking about recently, like for various like actual political reasons, but also like academic reasons and like cyberpunk reasons. And I think there's a lot of like interesting interaction between conspiracy narratives and cyberpunk narratives. I don't necessarily think that a cyberpunk narrative has to have a conspiracy, but I think that it's kind of like a pretty natural fit that appears a lot. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Always got to have your nice omnipresence, typically by an AI.
Yeah, right. It's gonna be interesting. Yeah, I haven't actually played Deus Ex before, so
That's the one
don't give me any
with the
spoilers.
guy. He has the arm, right? It's Adam Jensen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Deus Ex. Okay.
Yeah, or the I don't know. Like his name is like JC Dent.
Oh. Am I
Yeah.
thinking of something else? Because there's
No,
that
no.
sexy picture online of him like with like the abs. He's like naked and he's got like a cyber arm. You know.
Maybe
That's
that might be two
The
or
last 2
three.
games is that, and then the previous 2 games, Invisible War and the first one, are JC, I think.
Okay.
And I don't think they ever show the character really unless you look in a mirror. But basically, it just looks like Neo when you're like, woohoo, I have a trench
Yeah,
coat.
the first guy just like in the first one, you do get to see him in the mirror. He's totally like Neo,
Yeah.
like meets Blade. It's just that same like long trench coat. Like he's
Nice.
kind of got.
Mirror shades.
I don't know like what his sort of like racial profile is supposed to be because the
Yeah.
graphics are such like it's not super clear. He's kind of got a lot of cybernetic modification which gives him a kind of like dark look which makes me think of Blade, but I don't know whether he's supposed to be a black dude or what. So
It'd be cool if he was.
it would be. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But the story in that game, like I remember specifically, it was like a transformative experience for me the first time I played that game.
It's supposed to be really good, which is why I'm playing it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like it was doing something way different than most games, especially utilizing the perspective of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it was specifically like you're gonna get modified. You can do whatever you want with your body, and you can swap out all these different augmentations and do all this stuff. And like, I remember we were visiting my parents' friends in Toronto, and the guy had like a good enough PC to use it. So they were just like, my parents were just downstairs drinking and like smoking up with those guys because my parents are art teachers. So.
This explains a lot about you.
And so I and my brother upstairs were just like completely just playing this game for like 2 days straight until we had beat it. And just like every time one of us died, we just like swap places, that kind of thing. And yeah, it was just amazing. And it's cool because there's even like an academic essay about how like Deus Ex was transformative in that way, trying to make people feel like they were embodied and able to customize themselves. But I think the author talks about Invisible War instead of the first one because it did some other stuff. Ironically, that was the only one I didn't play, Invisible War, so I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing that I've been thinking about in that regard, and this is partly because Dana, my wife, is playing Assassin's Creed, and we've just started playing Assassin's Creed, but that's also like super conspiracy, and also kind of like could be a little bit cyberpunk in its meta plot, at least of the first arc, as I understand it. Again, another series that I haven't actually played any of, and I wouldn't call it cyberpunk because the main part of the game is not, but there's this kind of like techno conspiracy thing going on in the background, which is interesting. But we're both gearing up to play Odyssey when it comes out because BioWare doesn't have romance anymore, so we gotta go to some other company to get our like digital romance on.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, everybody, I remember being like, why no romance, though?
Isn't that the only reason we play those games?
Apparently so.
I mean, sometimes.
Just today that Kickstarter launched for the...
Yeah, Love and Swords or whatever.
Sword Boyfriend
or
Boyfriend. The Dungeon Boyfriend or Boyfriend Dungeon.
Yep. One of those ones. Yeah, I think it's Dungeon Boyfriend or something like that. But
dating sims are so fun.
Does anyone here play Food Fantasy?
No, what's that?
Oh, so it's like food boyfriends and food girlfriends.
Have you posted pictures about this on Twitter?
Maybe.
Did I see? Like it sounds kind of familiar. I feel like something.
I love that.
So it's like Pokemon, but like they're people that turn into food.
Oh my god.
It's really weird.
That brings whole new meaning to the eggplant gif. Or emoji.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, do you eat them?
So there's food that you make that's like edible,
it's real food.
And then there's people food, like anthropomorphized food.
I like it. It's cool.
Yeah, the boyfriend dungeon, it's called Boyfriend Dungeon Date Your Weapons, and it's already over funding goal too. It's at like,
nice.
I can only see Canadian, but it's about 12K over Canadian, so probably like 10K American or something.
Yeah.
Dating sims are where it's at. We need a cyberpunk dating sim.
Yeah.
Aside from Valhalla.
Yeah.
I don't know if Valhalla was one.
Is that a dating sim?
Well, I think you date people.
Oh, do you? I haven't played it yet.
You talk to them as a bartender or something. I don't know. You're at a bar and you're talking to people and there's flirting, I think.
Like,
but I don't know if you
actually. It's a date, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you go on dates. Like, what counts as a date?
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about...
I haven't played it either. I own it, but I haven't gone into it yet.
Same. And I haven't played that Red Strings Club yet that you recommended last time.
So good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah.
But what about, you didn't talk about Deus Ex?
I'm only super like near the start of it, so I don't have any deep thoughts about it as a cyberpunk narrative. I got my first augmentation, and it was like, do I want to lift shit well, or do I want to punch shit well? And I think I went with lifting shit well, because I generally am going to try not to fight things.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's what I always did.
Because you're supposed to be able to make these choices about like what style of play you want to do. So I'm going to try like a kind of stealthy type.
Yeah,
That's cool.
Is also going to result in lots of hilarious moments on the stream as I accidentally trigger fights and then get my ass handed to me.
Yeah.
It sounds like Hitman, the cyberpunk version, where you're like sneaking around and killing people from behind. Is that like, do you still have to kill people?
don't have
I
to.
didn't have to. I did kill some people in the first mission, but I didn't have to, and I don't.
Okay.
Oh, you didn't take the trank gun? I took the trank gun.
So I started the game, right, and I took the trank gun, and then I went into the game, and I'm like looking around, and I'm sneaking around, and I thought I had to go in a certain direction. I didn't, and there were some guards, and they beat the shit out of me. I shot one in the head with the trank gun, didn't really do anything. And I was like, oh, good, because I died. And then that was the point I realized, oh, wait, this is a game from 1998 or 2000 or whatever, so I have to save myself.
Yeah.
So I had to start again from the beginning. And now I know what the quick save
That
button is. So I did it again, but I was trying to like speed through the initial dialogue by hitting the spacebar, and as a result, I accidentally selected the sniper rifle instead of the trank gun. I didn't use the sniper rifle. I just like didn't have the trank gun, but it would have been super useful.
And in the latest game, I went through the whole game without killing anybody, and you can turn invisible, and I increased my hacking rating. You can remote hack stuff. It's very fun and cool. But
that's so cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and do a lot more of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
I like it.
You can do that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons I think that it's so well regarded, that it had this kind of like optional different play styles you can have, and it wasn't just like a run and gun kind of thing, or like forcing you to do this particular puzzle mini game or whatever. You could choose, and you can switch back and forth, but I don't think that's good. Like I think it's hard enough that you basically have to choose what you're doing and just go for that, because otherwise you won't really be good enough to do it. So we'll see.
Yeah,
it's a total opposite way of playing to my Skyrim character, who was like the ultimate multi-class everything.
Well, Skyrim.
Yeah.
I mean.
It's like, oh, what do I feel like today? I'm gonna be a wizard. Yeah.
Your every character.
Basically, yeah. Which is a little unsatisfying, to be honest. Having just come from like BioWare games where you kind of make some choices and it seals off options and it puts you on a certain path. And Skyrim is like, nah, you're the Archmage. Do you want to also be an assassin? Yeah, want to be in the Thieves Guild? Want to be like the king of everything? So yeah.
That was one of my favorite parts of the old one. Can't remember the old ones. Like
the Morrowind?
Yeah, the one before that.
Oblivion?
Oblivion, I think, in the 90s. Yeah, because I was like, what? You could turn into a werewolf?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I turned into a werewolf really quickly in my Skyrim play, and I have not
and I was like,
done it, actually.
I was like, yes, I'm a werewolf assassin mage. That was great when I was a teenager, but now I don't know.
Yeah, like I became a werewolf within my first few hours of playing that game, and then I haven't actually used the power. Like
I think I became a vampire.
Did any of you ever play Heavy Rain?
No.
Yes. I started playing it. It's by the same people that did the
Detroit?
Paige.
Oh yeah.
What's her first name?
Ellen Page.
Is it Ellen
Ellen
Page?
Page? Yeah.
Yeah.
She's
Canadian.
Canadian.
The Last of Us. It was the same people that did The Last of Us, right? Or
are they?
it was either The Last of Us or
so.
the Twin Peaks teenager photography girl one that I always forget the name of. It's one of my favorite games ever.
Beyond
Life is Strange.
Life is Strange.
Wait,
yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
Heavy Rain is David Cage.
Yeah, it's David Cage. It's it's
What the hell?
Detroit. Android City.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Detroit.
Alright, I'm just gonna Google it.
Yeah, Detroit.
But there is something with Ellen Page.
And Beyond, Two Souls is the Ellen Page one.
Right, yeah. And then there was something else that they did before
Yeah.
that was like very strange and
Indigo Prophecy.
that's the one, yeah.
Anyway, you were talking about Heavy Rain.
David?
So
David?
I like how the entire game is just like about solving like these murders kind of, but then there's like this cop that does weird like Minority Report stuff, like that weird technology that he uses. I feel like a lot of their games are very strange and tech heavy, but not really.
Yeah, it's very surfacey, I find. They're just like, this would be a cool aesthetic, so we'll do that, and then we'll make the premise revolve around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard the Ellen Page game was very good. I don't know why I thought about it.
I remember liking it. I remember it got panned in a lot of stuff, but it could have definitely been just problematic stuff, because I definitely played that game when I wasn't aware of all the problematic content that...
There was a lot of problematic stuff behind the scenes, I think. But I don't know about anything about the game itself.
Yeah. I don't know. I remember liking Heavy Rain, and I remember liking Beyond Two Souls. Indigo Prophecy, I came at later once people were like, oh, it's amazing, cult classic and stuff, and then I am all up in the aesthetic, so I was just like, these polygons look like shit, I'm out.
I guess that's the problem with
Yeah.
basing a game on an aesthetic, that it doesn't age well
Yeah.
necessarily. It might.
Yeah.
Depending on-
Truth.
It's true.
All right. Well, is there any kind of last things anyone wants to bring up? We're sort of going on an hour and a half now.
Well,
How are we going on
The-
our lists of things?
all of the punk stuff I was gonna talk about was like, I think there's a couple punk derivatives that are inherently cyberpunk, at least sometimes. Solar punk can be. Nanopunk definitely is, I think. And steampunk I have seen maybe one time. Something like that.
What is it?
Steampunk is like, I've seen
Oh,
it once.
steampunk.
Maybe.
Steampunk.
Yeah,
Not
actually,
steampunk.
cyberpunk. Yeah, not to be confused with that one. But in this like research for this, I found like so many punk labels. I can only assume is going with the movement's tangent of just trying to be, selling stuff very well as a commodity. And so there's like diesel punk, deco punk, atom punk, pith punk.
Yeah, what is pith punk?
Yeah, I have an article because there's so many that I was like, wow.
Because
So
it's
there's so many.
pith
I
with a
can't
Y,
even
right?
remember.
Not pith with an I, so it's not about helmets. It's
No,
not some,
yeah.
like, steampunk, but
Oh,
focused on the nitty gritty coalface of actual murdering colonized people. Some bullshit like that.
Yeah, where? Oh, I wonder if I just miswrote it or something.
You
well,
heard it here
I-
first. Pith punk, invented by Fraser Simons.
Yeah. If you're really pithy, then you can.
That's good. That's way better than my one.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was in this article, but maybe I was browsing a whole bunch of different ones. There's even like myth punk that I saw. So I don't know. There's a lot of different things. So no wonder with all of these derivatives, it's hard for people to know if cyberpunk is still a thing or not. Really.
So here's my hot take. Punk is is to genres as gate is to politics. Like, it's just you just, oh, I've got a thing, I'll just slap a punk at the end of it and that's my genre. Like, oh, it's a problematic political thing, I'll just slap a gate at the end of it and that's my scandal.
Yeah, that's fair.
That sounds about right. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, there's some legitimate stuff, but also, I mean, yeah, it sounds cool. So it, in some way, it's like the long afterlife of the aesthetic of cyberpunk.
Well, I've even seen, like, I've talked to a lot of people that don't know what cyberpunk is. Like, my parents didn't know what cyberpunk was, but yeah, it was good marketing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But
It's definitely one of
Yeah.
those things that had a big effect on like culture generally.
Yeah.
But outside of like subtle subgenres like role playing games, where cyberpunk as a genre label was still a vibrant thing from inception to now. Like it's less. It doesn't have as much of a profile as cyberpunk, I think.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Pretty weird. I guess because it's a subgenre of science fiction.
Yeah.
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 Because
Itself
sci-fi
like
is.
a minority kind of.
Yeah, except for like Star Wars, I guess.
Yeah. When there's even like it seems just a lot harder for people to define and talk about genre because so many people can contribute to it now.
Yeah.
Like solar punk is also sometimes referred to as eco punk or eco fiction or climate fiction or cli-fi and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, that's what I just call it because it's easier. But there's like
You don't want to
because
pitch yourself
people
like
are
a punk.
probing around this eco-fiction bubble thing happening right now, it's so difficult for them to define it, which is why I thought the anthology was so good because at least it's trying to. It's like trying to cultivate a whole bunch of different voices from all over the place. Like the authors are from all spectrums and from all over the world, and I think that does a lot more to define the genre than the five white guys who are like, this is what it is.
I wonder if
Totally.
we'll find that 20 years from now, people look back on that anthology in the same way that you can look back on the Mirror Shades anthology now, and you're like, man, they thought all of this was the same genre? That is some
Yeah.
weird shit. Because that is a diverse set of stories, that is for sure.
Yeah, well, that's why the motif, I think, is a helpful way to think about cyberpunk, whereas the introduction to Mirror Shades is, and then your subsequent reading of it is, like, not very helpful, because it's more of, like, a who's who.
I think that
Who knows
introduction
each other.
actually is the best part. Like, in terms of, you want to think about what cyberpunk is, the genre, the introduction where Sterling lays out his kind of like little brief manifesto. I think that's the best in some ways. There's some good stories in there as well, some good cyberpunk stories and some good stories that I wouldn't really consider cyberpunk, but that
Yeah,
intro is
exactly.
really good.
Exactly. That's why it's, like, not as helpful, because he's, like, he mentions authors where you're kind of like, that's not neither here nor there, Sterling. And then when you read that anthology, you're just like, what?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it really does show that at that point, like the way that they conceived of the movement and cyberpunk was as a collection of people and whatever they were doing, and their kind
Yeah.
of like political motives of pushing back against what mainstream sci-fi was doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the sword and sorceress compilations, you know, that existed, and like feminist fantasy things that were trying to create their own compilations and genres, but they're just kind of like all over the places.
Mm-hmm.
Compilations.
Yeah.
Is cyberpunk a compilation genre?
All genres are compilation genres.
You know what I mean, though? Like, it doesn't the touch points, but it doesn't. Yeah. I don't know.
I think the other thing that was interesting about it is it's heralded as such a boys club because they were such an insular group that didn't talk about what they were doing except with other people. Like, for instance, for like 10 years, people were like, oh, you suck because you don't cite your sources of inspiration within science fiction. But then later, when they were actually interviewed by other people, they did all the time, right? And they said they were like, there was this attitude that they didn't like any contemporary sci-fi, and also not give any credit to even feminist science fiction, which later on they were like, that was the foundation of everything. Have you heard about jacking in? You know. So yeah, it's weird about how much assumptions were drawn about it just because it was the inception of the internet and they couldn't like talk to these people readily enough, that so many different versions of what cyberpunk was became predominant. Like I read an academic essay from the person who knew the person who translated Neuromancer, which is seminal apparently in Japan because the person that translated it decided to use a specific dialect that they hadn't used before, marrying kanji with something else that was sort of like a youthful way of communicating the Japanese language, and it was the first one to kind of receive this and make it mainstream. So there was a reaction within Japanese science fiction artists, and the whole movement kind of splattered against Japan because this youthful person made this interpretation of the text, and then it just sort of like blew up. And because of the nature of translation, it blew up out there like 4 years later, right? Like, and by then, like, people were counting down the days of cyberpunk, whereas in Japan it just blew up right now. And so that's why, you know, the globalization aspects of cyberpunk is interesting, because, you know, Sterling or whoever it was, I can't remember who it was, did that famous thing where they're like, cyberpunk is over, you know, like, we're shuttering the gates, etc., etc., probably Sterling. And that's, as soon as they did that, He, She, and It came out, Trouble and Her Friends came out, a whole bunch of different eclectic stories came out of the motifs that they had made, and feminist authors actually decided to make, you know, feminist cyberpunk fiction. So yeah, I forget what I was talking about. Yeah.
All right. Well, that seems like it's probably a good place to leave it then.
We'll just end with me looking stupid.
I should have just faded out while you were talking and just slowly brought down the page.
That was a great rant.
That would have been good. And rants are very much a part of cyberpunk and the way that
True story.
the movement does its things. All right. So shall we sign off then in reverse order? So Banana, Fraser,
Okay.
Kira.
Hi, I'm Banana, and thanks for having me on the show. I am the owner of Game and a Curry, and I'm publishing a Judge Dredd game.
Judge Dredd.
Yay!
You should have that mask. That Judge Dredd mask.
Oh,
For
yeah.
whenever you do that, you can be like, Judge Dredd game.
It's a little hard to see.
You
over
could
the
just like
glasses,
sort of
but
hold it in front of you. Yeah, okay. When's that coming out, by the way?
It's being released in September.
Sweet.
Hopefully, if everything goes well.
I know it feels.
If not, then the next month. Whatever.
Cool. Fingers crossed. I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll send you all a copy.
Yes. This is why it was my true purpose for me.
All right, Fraser.
I'm Fraser Simons. You can find me at Fraser Simons at pretty much everywhere. And you can read my blog posts at least once per week at consumingcyberpunk.com as I continue to navigate cyberpunk academia and review things. Upgrade review just went up today, and last week those Cyberpunk 101 posts went up, so I'm doing the things.
Sweet. Good.
And I'm Kira. You can find me on Twitter at Kira Nazi, where you can see all my projects that I'm working on. I'm currently swamp deep in a David Lynch style LARP that I'm working on that's going to be kickstarted next month. So it's really cool and dark if you like David Lynch. If you like Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive
Yes.
or Blue Velvet and personal horror.
Can I just say completely on brand your section of the screen? Can I just say how completely on brand your section of the screen is right now?
Oh,
Just
yeah.
completely black except for you and with your face highlighted and then an open door in the middle distance.
Yeah, Bob could be back
He
there
could be,
watching me.
yeah.
He could be hanging out.
Well,
Twin
hopefully he's
Peaks
not. Bob,
spoilers.
stay away, Bob.
Yeah. If you,
It's fine. I welcome all black lives in my apartment.
Fantastic. And I'm Hamish, Peregrine Kiwi on Twitter and also on Twitch. This is my Twitch channel where I stream things top quality gaming content, usually involving me dying a lot when I do things incorrectly, like fail to trank someone. All right. So that's another show. I'm gonna hit this transition button. See you all later out in internet land. Thanks for the questions and the comments and the checking on the audio.
Bye. Fight me on her if you want.
Yeah, fight Fraser on her.